everyone, and welcome. I'm Amy Rose White, your integrative psychotherapist. Today, I want to talk about how we can actually make anxiety into our best friend, which for those of us that have struggled with anxiety or worry throughout our life might sound ludicrous and totally impossible, which is why I wanted to talk about it today. So the thing about anxiety is that we can shift our beliefs away from seeing it as this terrible, awful, hideous thing in our life that makes us feel overwhelmed and shaky and nervous all the time, and actually see it for the helpful messenger that it is. So let's just talk about what anxiety is commonly thought of for a second, and then as we go along, I'm going to describe to you what I believe anxiety really is. So when I talk about anxiety, what I really mean is a feeling that most people are referencing when they use that word to describe a tightness in their chest, rapid heart rate, feeling worried all of the time, maybe having racing thoughts, thinking about disaster scenarios and bad things that could happen to themselves, to people that they love, to the world. Just a general sense of worry and overwhelm and fear and if you know what that kind of feeling is. If you're watching this, you probably do. So that sense of anxiety can be a full-blown anxiety disorder. I'm not here to really talk about the criteria for that, but it's really about how much that sensation of anxiety interferes with your day-to-day life and your functioning. And that's how you know it's time to get help from a therapist or coach or psychiatrist or medical provider, even a naturopath, to address what might be contributing to the underlying causes of your anxiety. And there are many physical contributors, which I will be talking about in other videos after this. However, for our purposes today, I would like to primarily focus on helping us reframe how we look at the word anxiety and what it means to us in our lives and in our bodies. So again, those sensations that I just described are helpful information because they are simply, if we can think about it differently, a neutral signal that our brain is perceiving that something is wrong. There is a danger. When we feel that in our bodies and our hearts and our minds, our brain is perceiving that there is something dangerous in the environment that we need to protect ourselves from. And that is a beautiful function of the brain. That is one of the wonderful ways that we are wired, because if our brain was not looking, this is my lizard brain, by the way, the limbic system that leads us to that sense of anxiety. If our brain wasn't looking for bad, dangerous things in the environment, we probably wouldn't have made it this far as human beings. We need to be looking for signs of danger in our environment to know if there's going to be enough food, or if the babies over there are hungry and they're crying, or if there's a predator that we need to fight against, or even, other people that might not be safe for us in the environment. Historically, anxiety and fear, which we're going to talk more about in a second, they've kept us alive. So anytime you feel anxious, or you think of yourself as an anxious person, or you deal with anxiety, I want you to thank it. I want you to thank your anxiety because it's trying to help you. It is trying to serve you. It is a messenger. They say don't shoot the messenger. That's how I feel about anxiety. I think we need to be kinder and more loving and compassionate to our anxiety because it's actually trying to help us. So the first thing is to think about it as a signal. The second is to have appreciation and gratitude for anxiety. And then, and this might seem a little radical, I want us to throw the word anxiety kind of out for our purposes. I feel that anxiety is a garbage can word. Anxiety is really a mask for other unexpressed, unrecognized, maybe even repressed emotions that we simply we're out of conscious awareness of at any given moment. Anxiety is more common for those of us that have not learned to fully identify the other feelings besides anxiety in our lives and communicate that to ourselves as well as to other people. So I found that one of the most healing things about having anxiety is that it's an invitation to ask ourselves, what is the underlying true emotion that I am having right now? And spoiler, it's usually fear. There can be anger. There can be jealousy, rage, frustration, disappointment, lots of other emotions underneath the surface when we're feeling in our bodies anxious. However, to get to a place where we can better identify and say to ourselves, I'm feeling afraid right now, or I think I'm feeling uneasy or unwelcome here or angry about this situation, which is a more honest, expressive, and useful tool, because once we know how we're feeling, then that A, makes sense and doesn't seem as scary, and B, we can work with that. As long as we're milling around life saying, I'm anxious, and I don't know why, I'm just anxious, I'm anxious, that starts to signal to our brain that we're feeling more out of control, and that tends to drive up the sensation of anxiety. However, again, for those of us that aren't that practiced at knowing immediately what emotion that we're feeling, perhaps that was modeled for us. Perhaps we grew up in an environment where nobody talked about emotions at all, or if they had, then they were big and yelling and screaming or even violent. We won't have a wide vocabulary for what we're really feeling. We'll just feel anxiety. So the route, the healing path to discovering how we really feel, what anxiety is actually trying to deliver us to, is to begin with the physical sensations. Now, people that I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people with severe anxiety, and I've certainly experienced it myself, although I was in denial about my own anxiety for many years. I'll tell you that story another time. I didn't want to admit I had anxiety because I associated it with someone from my past that I wanted to be different from. And so it took me a long time to recognize that all these physical sensations in my body, for example, when I was trying to ski down a steeper mountain, or go backcountry skiing. These are some of the places where I would provoke my own anxiety over the last 10 years and then sort of suddenly realize, like, I think I'm really anxious about some things in my life. And I'm actually even creating situations, maybe to bring this up and to heal it. That's how I looked at it. But it was through my body that I recognized those symptoms and got curious. So when you're feeling anxious, this is the next piece. Is to recognize there's a feeling going on. What is that feeling? How can I find it through the body? So if you feel a tightness in your chest, rapid heart rate, maybe your palms are getting sweaty, maybe your stomach is in knots. I know some people that their head starts to burn, or their shoulders get tight, or their foot starts tapping like this. All you have to do is slow the breath down. So we invite awareness into the physical body, because as long as we're distracted, a lot of you might say, I don't feel anxious as long as I stay busy. Well, that's a great short-term coping strategy. And then what happens when you're in quarantine for 9 months and now you are alone and you have to be still with all that stuff, and there isn't as many distractions or even the capacity to get so busy that we aren't meeting what is happening inside of us. So that's why this skill is so important, because it only works so long, that distraction technique. So when we slow down the breath and become aware of what's happening in the body, the key here is to simply be not in non-judgmental, curious awareness of that state. So even right now, I'm going to slow my breathing down. And I'm noticing that there's some energy happening here in my chest. And I'm just going to breathe slowly and allow that energy to happen without creating a mental narrative about why that is and what that means and if that's bad and if something is wrong with me and if I should go to the doctor and blah, blah, blah. You know, if you're watching this, how the mind can just run away with those physical symptoms that we start to notice. So that's really key when you bring awareness to the physical body, is that we don't create a story about it. We simply breathe and say to ourselves, I accept and observe what is. I accept and observe what is right now. Now, when you do that for 5 or 10 breaths, then you might be more ready to say what emotion is underlying this anxiety. And it simply might be, I'm afraid. I feel fear. I read something on the news just now, and I got the sensation of anxiety in my body, and that caused a lump in my throat, and I'm realizing that I'm afraid right now. Okay, great. So now we know what the underlying emotion is. For our purposes, we'll use the example of fear. I feel fear. Now, the next step, and this is what gets people in trouble, is that story comes in. I feel the physical sensations. I have a strong emotion, and now I have a mental story about what that means. And it might be about you're interpreting a sensation to mean something dangerous right now, or it simply might mean that you have seen something or had a thought or a memory, or you got a text from someone, and all of a sudden your brain started generating what we call automatic negative thoughts, or ants. And I always tell clients, it's like ants that show up in your kitchen in the summertime. You're like, where the heck did these come from? I can't control how they got here. I don't know why, but they're here. And now that I've seen that they're here, I can make a plan to deal with the ants in my kitchen. And that's how anxious thinking is. It's also true for depression thinking, but we're going to stick to anxiety today too. So when you have that stream of anxious thoughts, that's where we can stop the process of that thinking if we've noticed the feeling and the body sensations and begin to question those automatic negative thoughts. Because what anxiety does is it spirals. Well, I could actually go this way because it kind of takes you down the drain. Anxiety will be interpreted by the body if we haven't labeled it as danger, and then our mind will create a bunch more stories about that danger, which we tend to automatically believe. And beliefs are just thoughts we've thought a million times. So what's really useful to calm anxiety, after you have slowed the breath down, notice your physical sensations, identified the underlying emotion, and then I want you to write down, what are all the thoughts going through my head? Now, this is why it's your best friend, because there is good information in anxiety telling you that certain things are bothering you, certain things are worrying you, certain things don't feel safe. And some of those things might be legit. If you are feeling a sense of anxiety when someone pulls in their car next to you in a dark parking lot, that could very well be your fear brain saying something isn't right here. And that's important to listen to. So in no way would I want you to talk yourself out of the helpful ways fear shows up in our bodies. However, if you find yourself in a non-threatening physical situation where your mind is spinning and spinning and you're getting more and more anxious, that's when these tools are very important. And it requires us to slow down the process and examine the thoughts. And today I'm just going to give you a really quick way to use cognitive behavioral therapy. I consider this mode elegant CBT. She doesn't call it that way. The creator of it, Byron Katie, developed something called The Work, but I love her 4 questions. To me, it is a condensed, elegant form of cognitive behavioral therapy, which works really, really well for anxiety. And I'm going to give you the cheat sheet Cliff Notes version today. So when you slow down the thoughts and you write them all out, I always ask clients to circle the one that is stressing you out the most, that makes you the most afraid or the most overwhelmed or frustrated or confused. And then Byron Katie's The Work, which, by the way, thework.com is a fantastic website. I encourage you to check out her books and website, which she offers all for free. The questions that she has in The Work are, is it true? So you want to ask yourself, is that thought that you circled true? Second question, is it absolutely true? Because most people will be like, well, it feels true. And I always say, feelings aren't facts, which is probably really annoying, but it's true. Because that automatic negative thinking fear brain will step in and tell us, yes, your perception is reality for sure, don't question it. However, when we question it, is it absolutely true? Oftentimes the answer is no. Then the third question of The Work is, how would I feel if I were incapable of thinking this thought? So you imagine you pulled that worried, scary thought out of your brain. How would you feel emotionally without it? Usually it's better. And then the last piece, it's less of a question and more of a command. Turn that thought around. So you simply tell yourself the opposite of the thought. That's how you turn it around. So for our example, we might say, I'm worried that I'm going to get sick and I'm going to die and leave my family behind without me. For something in your environment might be getting you to think that. Maybe you knew someone is sick, maybe it's the COVID stuff, maybe it's just a fear that you woke up with in the middle of the night. So, do we know that that's true? Do we know it's absolutely true that you're going to get sick and die? How would you feel if you couldn't even think the thought? Well, if I think that thought right now, I don't 100% know that it's true that I'm going to get sick and die and leave everyone behind right now. It will happen eventually, and that's a subject for another day. How would I feel? Well, I'd feel better if I wasn't worried about that. Turn it around. Right now, I'm unlikely to get sick and die and leave my family behind. Now, unless you are literally dying, which some people might be sick and dying, it's probably going to be relieving to you to turn that thought around and think and realize in this present moment there is safety, and that the brain's ability to try to keep you safe sometimes backfires and gets you actually less present in this very safe moment when we go to these anxious thoughts and let them run the show, and we kind of hop on that anxiety train and let it go down the track. So right now, there is typically safety, and that turned around thought is actually truer. So that's the last piece, is does that turned around thought actually feel truer than the first anxious thought? And typically it is yes. I won't say it's always going to be, but usually it's yes. Another way of working with those anxious thoughts about what if this happens, what if that happens, is to do a positive what if and say, well, if I'm going to create a story about all the bad things that could happen, I'm going to counter it with all the positive things that could happen. What if I don't get sick? What if I live to be 100? What if I enjoy many years of health with my family? That is just as possible a story as is the negative, scary one that makes you feel terrible. So I would encourage you to counter your anxious thinking or fear-based thinking with that kind of question, the positive what if. Overall, I want you to listen to the message of your body. It's asking you to pay attention. It's asking you to slow down. Anxiety is asking you, where might the real origin of the feeling be? Are you feeling anxious because you're really angry that you haven't had any time to yourself in months? Are you feeling some pain about the past, perhaps? Maybe a memory came up and that feeling needs to be discharged. And that's not really anxiety, that's something else. Is there an emotion you're avoiding that wants to be felt and released and healed? And that's the messenger of your anxiety. So I hope that this is helpful to you. Please like and share and comment below. We love your subscriptions. If this is useful to you, please let me know what you think. What's been your experience with anxiety? Do you think you could make it your best friend and turn towards the sensation with curiosity and, dare I say, even love and appreciation? Because the sensation of fear, which the message of anxiety almost always brings to us, is that something is not quite right. And we want to listen to that, and we want to pay attention, and we want to question it. We want to question those thoughts. And when we learn to be friends with the physical sensations and maybe even stop labeling ourselves as an anxious person, something to say, you could just say, I feel things deeply. I feel things intensely. I'm learning to listen to the signals my body is sending me. I feel fear often about certain situations, and I'm learning to work with that. That's a completely different reframe, a totally different way of seeing yourself in the world. And if you have someone close to you with anxiety, that is a much more useful, in my opinion, and loving way to see them in their own struggles with that particular style and habit of thinking and experiencing in the world. So again, please let me know if this has been useful for you. Please subscribe. I want to hear from you. And above all, I want you to trust yourself. Until next time, may you be happy. May you be well. May you be at peace.